Good evening. My name is Kendrick Brown. I am the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Redlands. I am very pleased to welcome you to this community conversation involving the students here at the University of Redlands and the surrounding community. I'm very happy to have this event here that is an outgrowth of the partnership between Southern California Public Radio, KPCC, and the University of Redlands. And we're hoping to have a very stimulating conversation that leads to a lot of good ideas being exchanged. So I want to hand things over to John from KPCC so he can start the event off.
Thank you, Kendrick. Well, thank you very much. On behalf of KPCC, Southern California Public Radio, welcome to this evening's event. And just to reiterate our gratitude to the University of Redlands for this outstanding partnership and for having us here this evening. We couldn't have done it without you. There's an outstanding team here that makes everything possible, and we're grateful to every individual who helped make that happen. My name is John Cohn. I'm the managing producer of KPCC in Person. That's KPCC's live events platform. Just real quick so I can orient myself, and we're all into polls here, just by a round of applause. How many of you are KPCC listeners? Great. Excellent, thank you. I have to ask, because some of my colleagues in the building would make sure I ask this. How many of you are members? Excellent. So there's a little bit of a disparity there. So the next time we come back, I'm hoping the second round of applause is just as loud as the first one. No, thank you. You make everything we do possible at KPCC on air, online, in person. On air, obviously, you know, we're an NPR affiliate public radio station. You hear us out here, 89.1 KUOR, but we make it confusing and use KPCC. We try to get as many different letters thrown at you as possible on air. Online, we have a comprehensive digital news service, kpcc.org. And then our third platform is In Person, which is doing what we're doing right now, getting out into the community and having conversations. In fact, this is the second time that we've been to the University of Redlands to do an event like this. The first time was in 2015. Couple weeks, it was around November. We were planning to do an event in December looking at business, finance, and econ here in the University of Redlands. And some things occurred towards the end of that year that made it possible and just impossible for us to convene that event. And instead, we came here. And apologies, I'm getting a little choked up. And we had one of the most powerful experiences that I think we've had as a team. We convened here with you all and had a very powerful conversation about community, dealing with tragedy, looking at this, how do we come together, how do we move on, and how are we thoughtful about our future? So as much as we come in as journalists and we try to talk to as many people as possible to inform our broader audience, we were overwhelmed and inspired by what you all did as a community and what we were able to be a part of that night. So when another opportunity and an idea and an inspiration came for us to return here, there wasn't much of a doubt that we were going to do everything we could do to make it happen. So thank you again for being the community that you are and having us back here this evening. Please give yourselves a round of applause. All right, so now on to the really important housekeeping stuff that I get in trouble if I don't mention. So if you have a question, we're going to have a panel. We're going to bring everybody up here in a moment. If you have a question for the panel, after the formal part of the program, we'll have a Q&A session. So when the time comes, we just ask you raise your hand. One of our producers will come to you with a microphone, and we ask you that you say your name, first name's fine, where you live, and you ask your question. We do ask that you try to be concise so that we're able to get to as many people as possible. Tonight's event will be live video streamed on our website and Facebook Live. Very exciting. And we'll audio record the event, and it'll be broadcast on our morning magazine show, Take Two. So while it's radio, you don't have to be quiet. We just ask that you're respectful in any kind of responses that you have. And as we begin with the host and we announce and we kind of get going, if the spirit moves you, you are free to applaud to reach the sound of the audio experience, but no obligation, no pressure. But you know, if you want to, you're more than welcome to. You're welcome to use your devices. We just ask that you silence them, and we ask that you engage with us on social media. We're using the hashtag #CAImmigration. Photos are okay, but please no flash and no video recording. And if there's anything while you're thinking about it during the program that we don't get to, we invite you to our mobile recording booth over there. If you have any questions of things that maybe we should address in our coverage, or specifically about immigration or otherwise, we welcome that as well. So, you didn't come here to see me or hear me. Without further ado, Please join me in welcoming the host of KPCC's morning show, Take Two, and your host for the evening, A. Martinez.
Well, thanks for having us out here. All right, so I'm going to do this radio style, everyone, so here we go. From 89.3 KPCC, this is Take Two, a Take Two special from the University of Redlands. I'm A. Martinez. New president, new policies, California immigration and the American dream. That's what we're discussing tonight. Now, a lot has happened since Inauguration Day on January 20th. President Trump signed an executive order to protect the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States. That's his quote. The order suspended the admission of refugees for 120 days. It also banned Syrian refugees indefinitely and also placed severe restrictions on immigration from 7 predominantly Muslim countries. There was confusion at airports as people landed in the U.S. hours after the action became law. Protests broke out. Lawsuits were filed. The travel ban was put on hold by a federal district judge on February 3rd. And just hours ago, the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court unanimously rejected the Trump administration's request to put the travel ban back into effect. Now, that is the backdrop for tonight's conversation. How could these shifts in immigration policy impact California? Joining me on stage, Xiadani, DACA recipient and student here at the University of Redlands. Edina Lekovic, public affairs consultant, Muslim Public Affairs Counsel. Niels Frenzen, clinical professor of law and director of the Immigration Clinic at USC's Gould School of Law. Jarrod Burguan, chief of the San Bernardino Police Department and University of Redlands alumnus. Steve Wuhs, assistant provost for internationalization at the University of Redlands. And Dorian Merina, reporter and producer with Take Two. Well, giving him a nice round of applause for being here. All right, so let's start with the court decision that came down just a little while ago. Xiadani, your reaction?
I think my initial thoughts were how Trump was going to react to the decision.
He tweeted, "See you in court." So
yeah,
that's one of
yeah. He all caps. It was fun. I honestly, my first thoughts just go out to the families of those who are affected. And I know it's difficult, but I think I'm confident that things will resolve themselves.
Edina, what about you?
This is a tremendous victory, and I'm somebody who, as I work with and on behalf of the American Muslim community, that I'm constantly holding my breath to see how America will react and how the different apparati of
Close enough.
of democracy will respond to this unprecedented president. And so I've been heartened every step of the way to see people rush out to airports, to see attorneys offering legal services, to see Democratic members of Congress showing up at airports to call for an end to this ban, and now for the court system to also be standing on the side of democracy and the Constitution this way. I think that we have to continue to hold the line, and the challenges will continue to crop up in different ways. It's like the carnival game, the whack-a-mole, that we have to stay on our toes.
Niels, what about you?
I mean, it's an important decision. It's a well-reasoned decision. I'm sure we'll get into some of the details in a bit. The court, Democratic and Republican appointees, unanimously rejected some extraordinary arguments that were made by the administration, one of which being that what the administration was doing with this executive order could not, under any circumstances, be reviewed by the judiciary. And so the Ninth Circuit has said, no, the Constitution is relevant in our analysis and is upheld for the time being the district court's injunction of the travel ban.
Chief Burguan, what about you?
So I'll take a little more of a simpler approach just from the law enforcement standpoint. When the executive order was signed, I think law enforcement all over the place said, okay, how does this impact us? How does this change the expectations on us? And for the most part, it's been a wait and see. How is this going to evolve? What will the expectations on us be? For me personally, and I think for the industry, when you see the Ninth Circuit's decision, that's kind of a process that we're kind of used to. It's a judicial thing, and we will wait until ultimately the final determination is made if the Supreme Court hears it. So nothing necessarily changes for us, so I don't necessarily see it as a watershed moment from an industry standpoint.
Steve.
I think I have a two-part answer to the question. I'm also a professor of political science, and so on one hand, I want to agree with Edina's point that what the decision suggests is that there is the possibility of effective checks and balances in this presidential system that we have, and there were moments where that wasn't as clear, and so I'm very encouraged, and I hope that the courts continue to work as they are designed to work. In my administrative job here, I'll say that it enables people to take a deep breath and relax and exhale a bit, but I'll note that the case isn't over. So just because the Ninth Circuit Court found as it did in this case, it doesn't mean that the travel ban is gone yet. And so, you know, there is going to be significant follow-up action by the president.
Dorian, you've been working on stories that involve people that are directly affected by this.
Yeah, I think my thoughts went to some of the people that we have been interviewing and talking about on the station about how this policy affects their lives. One group we've been looking at are Iraqi interpreters who served alongside U.S. service members in Iraq and most of them qualify. They go through a process and they're able to qualify for what's called a special immigrant visa and find their way to the U.S. It's a long, complex process, but they have that avenue available to them. When the executive order first came down, there was a lot of confusion and uncertainty about how it would affect this group, and initially they were halted from coming in and from even applying for it. But after a strong reaction from the military community and after veterans, among others, there was an exception made to that policy. And we talked to a 30-year-old man here, well, in Los Angeles, named Sham Hassan, who worked alongside the U.S. military in southern Baghdad, helping this Iraqi army rebuild. And he talked about how it affected his journey here. And I think as reporters and producers, we're trying to understand these policies in a very confusing time and doing our best to see how it affects our communities here on all sides of the issue. So I think my thoughts went to some of the groups we've been looking at in our communities.
All right, now the title of the evening today is New President, New Policies, California Immigration, and the American Dream. Niels, let's start with you there. California's immigration policy, is it in line with federal policy? Does it have its own? Can you give us a context over where we stand?
Well, California, like any other state, cannot have laws that directly impact the admission or the deportation of non-citizens from the United States. But we certainly see in California, and you can contrast us with states like Arizona, we've seen the state legislature try to take steps to limit cooperation between state and local jurisdictions, particularly law enforcement, in regard to cooperation with immigration and customs enforcement. And we have in California the Trust Act. We have various laws that protect or provide financial aid to undocumented students or documented students who are going to the Cal States or the community colleges or the UCs. So there is an extensive body of law at the state level in California that is more welcoming than a lot of other states.
Are cities that declare themselves sanctuary cities in effect creating policy?
Well, I mean, there's no definition for what constitutes a sanctuary city. Certainly, I believe Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles has been hesitant to use those words publicly because I think he is fearful of backlash from the new administration. That has not been the case with other states, with other cities in California. But what local jurisdictions that call themselves sanctuary jurisdictions are implementing that declaration in a variety of different ways in regard to how police or sheriff cooperate and share information with ICE.
Now we have a policeman here, Chief Burguan. When it comes to seemingly this shift in immigration policy, it seems like it goes back and forth. How does this affect you on the local level?
So, you know, when this thing came up, when the executive order was signed, I actually had to think to myself, well, I better go look at our policy and see what our policy says, right? The reality is that there really isn't immigration work or enforcement being done by local police departments, really, anywhere in California for the most part. 25 years ago when I started my career, I think that there was maybe a little bit of a relationship between Border Patrol and local police back then, but as policies have evolved, as thinking has evolved, as priorities have changed and shifted for police departments and cities, I don't know of a single police department that engages in regular immigration work. What does happen, and I'll just tell you what our policy says. Our policy says that we will not stop anybody for the sole purpose of determining their immigration status. We do have a caveat in our policy that allows if an officer has somebody detained for a legitimate reason, for a crime or something of that nature, and there is a question as to whether that person's in violation of federal law, you can hold the person just long enough to contact immigration officials and see if they want that person. That's contained in the policy. I can't tell you the last time that that's ever actually happened. In our particular city, in San Bernardino, there's a very, very small ICE component, so to speak, and there really is no relationship in terms of ICE agents coming out and picking people up from the street level. So it just simply doesn't happen. What does happen is when we legitimately arrest somebody for a crime and we take them to jail, there is a process through the county jail system where if somebody's an undocumented alien or a criminal status and they're not in the country legally, there is a process before their release where ICE may be notified and ICE has the opportunity to come out and pick that person up. But even that is tightly controlled by the Truth and Trust Act and a lot of variables. So nothing really happens at the local level. What I did do is after the president's order, I went back and I looked at our policy and I said, well, nothing really conflicts with what the president's order was. So we've taken very much a let's sit back and let's watch and let's see what happens and how this evolves. But nothing has changed for us from an operational standpoint.
Chief, when did you join the San Bernardino Police Department?
1992.
1992. So I'm wondering just if you could, I know it's an arbitrary question I'm going to ask you, but from 1992 to 2017, how much of your day or your job is spent on immigration issues or questions, as opposed to just your normal police work?
Well, so there is a considerable part of my job that is attached to communicating with our community and having a relationship with everybody in the community, regardless of what your immigration status is. And so there's a lot of time spent in terms of alleviating fears, alleviating concerns, making our community feel comfortable that we are not immigration officials in the way that we do our job. And there's a community policing component to that we want to have trust and cooperation of communities. We need those communities to trust us back. And we don't want people to be fearful to reach out for the police for fear that they might be a victim of a crime and they're going to call us and we're going to show up and lock them up and deport them. And that's not our role. That's not what we do. So we spend time engaged in that conversation. How much time do I spend actually doing immigration work? Pretty much zero over the course of 25 years.
Okay. Edina, you mentioned earlier how you felt that the decision that came down was a victory in some ways. Is it because the travel ban focused on mostly Muslim countries? Is that why you see it as a victory?
I see it as a victory because I feel like we are in the pool of water on the other side of a dam, and that we are putting our fingers into the holes in the dam and trying to hold back the flood of what this administration is potentially capable of and what they have said that they plan to do. And so in that sense, I think that we have to celebrate every time we hold the stream back or the flood of water back. And on the other hand, I think it's also a victory. I haven't seen in a long time Americans rushing to the defense and support of Muslim Americans. And I've been doing this work for 15 years. I had a friend who joked that, before the election, to be a Muslim and pray in the airport meant that, you were inviting a security officer to come detain you. And now in these past few weeks to see Americans of all different backgrounds link arms together and stand guard while Muslims pray in the airport because they're part of the demonstration that's going on there. For me, as an American, I see a shift in what is taking place in the level of compassion and the level of empathy that we're seeing among one another. And to me, that says that we are in it together, and that's what I expect will hold our country together moving forward. Is that across our various self-interests, we know that women, Latinos, LGBTQ community, Muslims, African Americans, you name it, there are so many targeted populations, and the more that we stand together with all Americans of conscience, the more that we have the ability to save our democracy. And those are not words that I imagined I would be saying, a month ago or a year ago. But in this era, the people power that we are seeing is critically important.
You're with the Muslim Public Affairs Council. Was there a time in the last few years, or maybe just when you started your career, that immigration and religion were kind of mixed together?
It's been an ongoing issue, but in a parallel to what's happening now. So, President Trump said that he was going to ban Muslims. He made that very clear, and I heard this wonderful cry out from people saying, if he makes Muslims register, I'll register as a Muslim. And that's a heartening thought, and yet we know that he's not going to ban Muslims outright. There won't be a Muslim registry, literally. And so this ban on 7 countries represents a Muslim ban dressed in selective countries' clothing. And it's just the first step. It's sort of a test balloon. So to see the rapid and fierce and response to that test, I think is what's heartening, because what we're expecting now is executive orders that have to do with the wall, with immigration, with deportation, and with Jeff Sessions today confirmed as Attorney General. We know that the next target is potentially going to be there.
Xiadani, you're a sophomore here, University of Redlands. You came to the United States when you were 4 years old. I don't imagine at 4 you knew that you were undocumented.
No, I didn't.
Did you did?
No, I did
okay,
not.
you didn't. So when was there a time, a moment when you realized that you were different?
I think, especially with the intersection of different identities, you don't really think about being undocumented until you're confronted with it, in the same way that you don't think about being low income until you can't afford to go out with your friends. You don't think about being queer until people assume that you're straight. And I think it paralleled my identity as an undocumented or an undocumented student here, paralleled my other identities in very overt ways. I think one memory that I have from middle school was not being able to go on a trip, and because the school was unwilling to have me be the only one to not attend.
Where was the trip to?
The trip was to an island, Santa Catalina Island, and we were unable to go.
The whole class?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I wasn't able to leave the continental United States, and I told one of my friends that I was the reason that we weren't able to go, and she was very upset, and so she told a lot of my other classmates.
So you were outed then?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it wasn't something that I was prepared for, but I felt after that incident, I kind of had to take ownership of, regardless of the way that I did not have a choice in coming here, I had no agency in being in this country. I feel this country's my home. And with that, I think I've strived for transparency, especially in terms of my identities, so that people can personalize the identity. There's a book called If You Knew Me, You Would Care. And I think that statement really resonates with me, just in the ways that a lot of my friends will know me and then know me as an undocumented person later, and it will completely change their perception on the issue, because these issues aren't just political, they're very personal. They're your best friend, they're your neighbor, they're your classmate.
How do conversations shift when people find out what your status is?
I think people like to walk on eggshells when they find out. And if they don't walk on eggshells, they're very honest about how I'm breaking the law by being here.
You've been told that.
Yeah. in joking ways and in also very not joking ways. So I'll sit in a classroom, and during the election, I remember one of my friends was like, "Oh, Xiadani, you're undocumented." I'm like, "Yep, I am." And he's like, "Oh, like, are you scared that they're gonna just build a wall around you?" And I was like, "No, nope, not yet." And so I think people react in very different ways because I think, as I said, I'm a person, and within my body, I'm also this immigration issue, and so I think people kind of stop and really have to look at, okay, is this an undocumented person or is this my friend? And I read a book called Citizen, and it's a beautiful book, and she talks about the ways that there's your self and then your historical self. And I think people really like to talk to the self. People like to think that I'm their friend. And when we're confronted with our historical selves and how historically there's this perception of who I am as an immigrant that's not true, people get confused. I think the perception is that me as an immigrant, I'm a leech. And that I'm here for my own self-interest, but I think people forget that I'm a part of a community.
Well, let's just say for a second that you and I are talking on campus, and I'm a student that just met you and found out that you're undocumented, and I say, well, Xiadani, technically you are breaking the law by being here. What would be your response to that?
I think my response is that I had no agency. I, at 4 years old, didn't ask my parents to bring me here, and I think it's important to note that I have been trying in all of the small ways that I can to remedy that. I've had an application in to become a citizen since before I got here. I now have DACA, where I'm working with the state, and I have an employment authorization. I go to school here with that DACA, and I also have an application for political asylum, because as a queer person, it's not safe to be in Mexico and be out in the ways that I feel like I need to be in order to be myself.
Steve, when it comes to this campus, how do you balance being a safe space for students, doing your job as a professor and what you do here, and kind of keeping this conversation going without it getting to the point where it can get very intense?
Right, so I think the first job at a any university, but especially a university that's our size, we're a small school, and our community is very tight at the University of Redlands, and so I think our first and foremost concern, both for international students, but also for our DACA students, is to maintain a welcoming environment for the students, a supportive environment for the students. So we have a couple of offices on campus that are explicitly devoted to making sure that those students, and they run multiple programs, those students have somewhere to go when they have concerns, when they have questions, when they don't feel safe and secure, which has been the case since these executive orders came down right after Trump was inaugurated. So on one level, I want to say that I think is the first and foremost concern of members of the faculty, members of the administration, and in fact members of the student body, is that this needs to be a supportive and inclusive place. It does transfer then over into the classroom, and I'll say that the very sort of pitched political environment, polarized political environment we're in, is challenging in the classroom because there are boundary lines that one runs into while teaching that are difficult to navigate, because part of being at a liberal arts institution is questioning those fundamental assumptions with which you've been raised, but this environment is not one that's always conducive to that.
How much has that ramped up as an educator? Have you seen it more intense in the last few months, last few years?
So as a political science professor, every election year is horrible. Okay. And so it's always challenging, but I'll say that this round was more challenging and more gratifying for me because this was not an election that is normally when when you're dealing with, in a classroom with pitched political conflict at election time, that's about left versus right, Republicans versus conservatives, and so the challenge is creating a space where everyone is able to express their views and have their views challenged. That was not what this campaign was about, because policy issues weren't at the forefront of the campaign. And so it was a different sort of challenge to be able to think about these broader questions about the principles that undergird democratic political systems, like checks and balances and that sort of thing. And so we saw that unfold during the campaign, and we saw that unfold in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration. So it has been a challenge. I'll say I've never questioned my worth in the classroom less than I do now, because students want to grapple with these questions because they are in their face. There's no denying that the principles of how democracy is supposed to operate matter.
Dorian, as a reporter for KPCC, have you seen some of these issues that we've heard and talked about to manifest itself in what you do?
Well, all these issues, I think, bring up a fundamental question that that we ask as a society, and that is who deserves to be a part of the society, who should be here legally, and who should not, who should be removed. I mean, that can be seen as a moral question, but it can also be seen as a practical question, a legal question. So one of the things I've been looking at a lot here are the immigration courts, because that is largely how we determine as a society who has a strong enough case to stay and a legitimate reason, and who should be removed. So over the past 2.5 years or so, I've been spending a lot of time in the immigration courts in Los Angeles. And just to back up for a second, the court system in the nation this past year, 2016, it passed 500,000 cases pending. That's an historic level for the backlog of our immigration courts. Here in California, we have about 1 in 5 of those are here in California, so about 100,000. In the LA court system, half of those are seen by judges, so about 50,000. What that means on a practical level is that the wait times get longer and longer. So right now they're above 700 days or so. That's more than 2 years if you're coming before a judge. These are considered administrative cases. And why that's important is because people who come before judges do not have the same relationship to the court, meaning they are not guaranteed legal counsel. And so when it comes to child migrants especially, which make up a large share of the recent cases we've been seeing, that can have big consequences. Another thing is, there's been a lot of talk about the separation between the judicial branch and the executive branch, especially with these decisions that have come down. The immigration court system is housed directly inside the executive branch, so it is not part of the judiciary. And that's important because it's under the Justice Department now. And we have a new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who has a lot of influence over how these courts are run in terms of appointing judges or setting priorities, as did our former Attorney Generals. So on a practical question of when someone gets a removal order, when someone is caught by ICE, when someone goes through the deportation process, this is a court system that largely the public does not have a lot of access to. And one of the things that we have tried to do is give a picture and insight into what happens when these court cases go forward, what are the practical obstacles that go into them, and we've spoken to judges, attorneys, DHS attorneys, as well as defense attorneys, and almost all of them are in agreement that it is a system that is overburdened, and it's a system that is not serving the public as much as it could. And so one thing to keep an eye on going into the future is to look at how the system will or will not change, and what the consequences of that could be.
Now, you mentioned that the system is overburdened, but is it broken in general? Niels, is the immigration system here in the U.S. broken?
Yes, it is broken both as a, at the statutory level in terms of the laws that Congress has written over the years, and it is certainly broken at the operational level. The Obama administration, I mean, the backlogs that we're talking about were not caused by the Trump administration. They were caused by the Obama administration, and it was, not a false charge to make against President Obama, as a lot of immigrants' rights organizations did, calling him the deporter-in-chief. He poured in lots of resources into the Border Patrol and into ICE. The backlog that we have in the courts is because the courts were not expanded, to the same extent as the law enforcement agencies, but the system is not functioning.
Chief Burguan, same question for you. Is the system broken? And does the system make your job harder?
So I'll take that across the board in everything that we do. We have a system that is completely overcapacitated. There is just all of these issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's crime, whatever these areas are, these spaces that we exist in, there is not nearly enough resources in place to truly and effectively deal with any of these issues, and I think immigration falls into that category.
Xiadani, for you, have you dealt with the immigration courts at all? Any family members?
Yes, I have. In applying to DACA, I have had to get biometrics done, and I think that was the moment when I realized that there isn't as much communication as there should be within Homeland Security. I had to have biometrics done for my DACA application a week before I had to have biometrics done for my political asylum application, and I really don't think my biometrics changed in those 5 days. And so I think greater communication would lead to better efficiency and I think more productivity in the ways that Homeland Security does want to serve the people.
I'll just add to that as well. The confusion I think that Xiadani is referring to has been seen on a broader scale in terms of if you're applying for asylum, there's a separate related track that you get into through the immigration court system, and we have asylum offices in Southern California that are going through, as well as the immigration courts, and oftentimes it can be a very confusing and complex process, and that's been talked about as an effort to how do we make this clearer, and how do we make it a system that comes to resolution for all parties involved? How do we make it more efficient so that those who do have a claim to stay can, and those who do not can be decided on clearly their cases?
Edina, if the system is overburdened, if we agree on that, does President Trump have a point in that maybe we should limit the amount of people that come in?
The system is broken. That's the fact that we start from, and all of the different aspects of it are broken. So even as we look at the lawful process that's related to refugees, there's a lot of rhetoric flying around about extreme vetting. And this has often been repeated, but it bears repeating, that Syrian refugees and other refugees from these 7 countries and a host of other countries go through extreme vetting, that the wait time is often 2 years plus before folks find out what the result of their application is. And for refugee applicants, we have to remember that they're fleeing from war and conflict and a lack of basic stability in their lives. And so these are people whose lives are often in the balance, hang in the balance, waiting for answers, and they're thoroughly vetted, so that we're getting the best of the best, if you really think about it. And those people deserve to come here with a fresh start. And unfortunately, in this environment, you think about these people who have been sent back from airports in the last couple of weeks, and then now with this temporary stay, they're trying to get in before the doors close. But when you are if we picture ourselves walking into a new country, starting a new life after a war-torn, brutal life, to go from uncertainty and instability into uncertainty and stability in the United States is a sad situation to be in. And we have tens of thousands of refugees living among us here in Southern California. And it's worth repeating that these 7 countries that are on the list, not a single act of terrorism has been perpetrated by anybody from these countries in the past 25 years plus. So the national security arguments that are being made here are what's truly frightening, because they don't match up with facts. And that's what we also expect as we move forward. The administration might have temporarily been held back in this regard, but we certainly expect that witch hunts after our various communities will pop up in other ways. And that might be related to immigration, it might be related to your religious beliefs, it might be related to any host of things that are out there. So it's particularly challenging for new immigrants and recent refugees to be navigating that kind of environment when they're really going to be focused on being able to find a job and being able to get their children into school and being able to build a new life in the process. And that's fundamentally what America was built on. So it's a classic story.
Edina, what don't we know about how this issue affects Muslim women?
I don't know that it affects Muslim women in a particular way or in a distinct way from other groups. I think when I think about Muslim women these days, frankly, I think about women like Linda Sarsour, who was one of the 3 women who organized the International Women's March that took place, and that event was a symbol of what our country looks like today, that you had a young black woman, a young Latina woman, and a young Muslim Palestinian woman from Brooklyn working together to create the largest mass demonstration in history, and that is the face of America that I connect to. And my family, mind you, is from the former Yugoslavia. So I am not a person of color by any technical sense, except that through my Muslim identity, my identity gets racialized. And I get, and you know, the word intersectionality is coming up a lot these days, but how your race and your gender and your class and all these other aspects that make up who we are, how these pile up on top of each other. And so I know that I feel it, and as I talk to friends, women who wear hijab or a headscarf these days, in some ways, it's astounding to me. I feel like a sort of a new level of respect because people are paying attention in a different way, and I'm excited to see that there is this sense of, if they come for you today, I know where this goes. And I think that's the metaphor of the canary in the coal mine is particularly useful here. So Muslim women, I don't know that we have it particularly bad, except that for women who cover, there's perhaps more concern about security, personal security, and whether you are safe being out in public, right? Because hate crimes against our communities have gone up by unprecedented levels, and Muslim women who wear hijab are often prime targets because of false perceptions of our submission and docileness. People don't know what they're getting into. There's more and more, and many of our mosques are now having like self-defense classes for women. So it's a complicated picture like any other community, and I just go back to what a sad state of affairs when your basic walking out of the front door doesn't feel like a comfortable, natural thing to do. And I fully understand that many communities feel that way every day. It's just that my privilege has been disrupted with this, with the latest events.
Steve, I didn't mean to skip you when it comes to your thoughts on whether the immigration system is broken.
Yes. No, I mean, there's not much to add, although I will say that when it comes to this question of extreme vetting and permissive immigration practices and that sort of thing, I look at it through the lens of our international students at the university who are vetted and regularly denied their visas. So it's not that, and the vetting is done by U.S. consular officers that are trained to vet. And so one of the things that was interesting I thought about the court case was the question of where's the breakdown, right? And what is the nature of the extreme vetting that needs to be increased? What is not? Because there was a lack of specificity in that case. And so given that the vetting is in place and the vetting is fairly standardized, one presumes, across consular officers and already more extreme in country cases that are perhaps more concerning to the U.S. State Department and Homeland Security. I guess I would have liked to hear more of that. I mean, there was a great lack of detail in the argumentation in the court case.
If there was a young person, say in Syria, that wanted to come to the University of Redlands, how difficult is it for them?
Well, right now, I think one of the concerns that lots of colleges and universities are having is that we're going to have a difficult time recruiting international students to come here because the United States now presents as a relatively hostile environment. We're going to have a very difficult time retaining international students. We're going to have a difficult time recruiting international students. And I think that's a real concern for lots of colleges and universities. To your question, a student applies as an international student, a student is admitted, and then they go through a process of proving also in a fairly detailed way in order to get their F1 visa, all of the assets that they have to both pay for their education, but also the depth of their network at home, so that we have a sense that they are going to go home at the completion of their time. And they have to, the requirements are quite burdensome ultimately for Homeland Security in order to get that F1 visa issued. And you're probably in a better position to comment on this than I am, but it's not easy for international students to come here.
Coming up in about 5 minutes, we'll take questions. So there's 2 people walking around with microphones. When you got a question, please raise your hand, and we will get to you as soon as we can. Niels, how are other countries dealing with refugees and immigration right now? Is there a way to kind of compare the United States with other countries around the world?
Well, I mean, historically, the United States has had a very generous overseas refugee resettlement program. Now, we've been very selective in terms of who we pick and choose, and one of the good examples of that is the U.S. Continues to take 5,000 Cubans as refugees every year, and we've done that for decades. And Cubans, we can talk about the situation in Cuba, but it doesn't compare to the situation in Central America. It doesn't compare to the situation in the Middle East. Canada has indicated is trying to recruit our international students. Canada, Prime Minister Trudeau has indicated that if there are refugees in the U.S. resettlement pipeline who are turned away by the United States, that Canada would welcome them. So there is some examples that we can look to just north of the border. We can look at Europe right now, and there's a very difficult and ugly situation that is transpiring in Europe in regard to Syrian refugees, in regard to African migrants and African refugees, and so the U.S. unfortunately does find itself in good company in regard to how the European Union is in a xenophobic manner turning its back on protecting people, and Syria is the greatest human rights crisis that the world has experienced since World War II. Former Yugoslavia was a major humanitarian crisis, but Syria has superseded that.
Chief Burguan, if your city, San Bernardino, were a place where refugees settled, would that raise alarm bells in any way? Would you have to maybe pay special attention to protect them, or maybe have other people that live in the area contact? I mean, how would that work?
So we've had discussions before about refugees, and one of the frustrations that I've heard jurisdictions and police departments complain about is the lack of dialogue or information about having refugees settled in your city, and then suddenly police officers are coming upon pockets of folks that don't speak the language, and there's the issues that arise from that, and then they learn that way. So that would be a little problematic. I think the bigger issue, you got 2 parts of policing here. You still have that community policing component that you've got to have a relationship. You've got to police your community. You've got to know the people in your community, and you've got to have that trust factor. And somehow you got to build that trust. You got to build those bridges. But on the other hand, you have to also deal with that component of your community that's going to be very boisterous about that existing in the city, and you've got a balancing act from a police department standpoint, and you're kind of between the two in many ways. Not necessarily refereeing a fight, but understanding that you've got the dual roles. You've got to be able to show your community that we're here, we've got it under control, we know what's going on, and yet at the same time you've got to build that bridge. Interestingly enough, I've had the opportunity to travel around the country, and I have gone into some communities that, in the Midwest that you would think of as just, all white people or something is how you might stereotypically think of it, and only to find out that, there's an extraordinarily large population of refugees from a North African country or from Somalia or someplace like that. And I've talked to officers that police those communities, and I say, okay, so what's that experience really like? What is it, you know, here you are as a, you know, hypothetically a white male, middle class, you know, born and raised in this country, played football, the traditional stuff. You're a police officer, and now all of a sudden you're in this community that is very foreign from a cultural standpoint and from a lot of things. And for the most part, without fail, all those officers kind of go, you know, it's not really that big of an issue. You know, there's most of those police departments that have those large pockets of people do a lot of outreach. They do a lot of things to try to build those bridges and make them part of the community. And the problematic part of it is typically not nearly as large as one might think it would be from the outside.
Xiadani, for you, now, not a same situation in terms of refugees, but when it comes to, I'm going to reach and guess that in your community, when you grew up, that there were other people just like you. Did you feel that there was a light over your community that, hey, these are where the undocumented people are?
I think, as a lot of other people can attest, we make jokes and we make light of very hard situations. And so I think it was a running joke. I remember in middle school, whenever we had to run the mile, the running joke was, okay, just pretend that ICE is chasing you.
Did it help your mile time?
I mean, I made it.
Okay.
I passed. And so I think we felt safe because we knew we weren't alone. And we knew that if someone came for us, we would be together. And I think now that's the troubling part, not knowing if we're going to stay together. I think that's what scares, especially people in my community, the most. Not knowing if you're going to end up with your parents or some strangers who are in a similar situation as you.
We're going to get to questions in just 1 minute. Dorian, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to the people that you've been working with and the people that you've been covering, have you seen or maybe felt a sense of community that exists there? I mean, sometimes it's easy for people to feel all alone and that there's no one to help them and that they can't navigate this on their own. But have you gotten a sense that there's a unification there?
Well, I would say we speak to people and spend time with people who have all different views on this issue. So, and I would say yes. I mean, I think there is a strong sense of community among the people who strongly support Trump's policies. There's a group in Long Beach that we spent some time with and spoken with. And they see, as we've described, a system that is not functioning, that is broken, that needs changes. And there are also groups of people in the undocumented community, perhaps, or in the legal immigrant community. And I think when these issues come to such a head as they are now, I think it really exposes some of these central questions that in California, with our long history of immigration and our very different ways of reacting and approaching the issue of immigration and how immigration really plays a central role in our economy, in our culture, in our schooling, and in our education, it forces groups to think about what are our values? What are our value system? What do we bring to the society? What role do people play? And essentially, what is the role of a citizen? And I'm using that word in a broad sense, of a citizen in our society. And so I'd say that the good part of this debate that we have is that it's an opportunity for people to really take a look at that and see what community do I feel part of and how do I fit into this society.
All right, let's take some questions. If anyone has a question, you can please raise your hand and we will come find you. And I know that this is a very emotional and intense issue, so pretend you're on Jeopardy and make sure that you ask it in a form of a question, please.
My name is Kaiser Ahmed. I'm an American Muslim and an immigrant from Bangladesh 44 years ago. My question is, while the president and the judiciary are having a tug of war, what are the legislators doing? Isn't that their job to legislate a sane immigration policy? The only time they acted was against those Syrian refugees which they voted down, President Obama's plea to admit some Syrian refugees. And as most of you know, that most of these refugees, while they're Muslims, but they're being persecuted by Muslims, fellow Muslims, even fellow Sunnis. So my question to anyone in the panel, that what are the legislators doing? What are they planning to do? They keep talking, but they don't do anything. And I
So-
have to add one more thing.
Okay.
I am a candidate for U.S. Congress from this district, 31.
Oh, okay. So legislators, lawmakers, their role in this issue. Niels or Steve, who wants this one?
It's the legislator's job to make laws. So the fact that we don't have a comprehensive immigration reform is a responsibility of the failure of the legislature. The presence of executive orders happen when the legislature fails to act. If we had standing legislation that addressed these problems, then the executive orders wouldn't have been possible. They would have been constitutionally problematic earlier. And so this is entirely about the failure of the legislature and then, of course, the executive branch to reach consensus on comprehensive immigration reform.
Then Niels, what's the holdup then?
Well, I mean, I would just add that under the U.S. Constitution, the executive does have some independent authority to act in regard to immigration. And the president's strength in regard to acting in areas of immigration is at its strongest constitutionally when it works in conjunction with the laws that Congress has passed. And so we do see President Trump citing to some specific statutory authorization to justify what he's doing. And we can talk more about that if there's interest. In regard to what's Congress doing, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has basically said, we're going to let this play out in the courts. Congress, the Senate at least, is not going to get involved in vetting looking at the executive orders.
And if we can think way back to 2012, the election there, if we remember, I know after this election it's like hard to remember anything else happened, but after that election there was a huge push and momentum to work on a comprehensive immigration reform, and that came from both sides of the aisles. And if you recall, all through that winter and into the spring, there was a lot of hope that some of these reforms would come. There was compromises on both sides and so forth. Now, there's a lot of stories about why it broke down, but it did break down, and it's remained in that way since then. So until I think there's a strong public push to take action and to have legislators address this and find out, what's going to work for their constituencies, it's remaining that way.
And former Senator Jeff Sessions played a big role in killing comprehensive immigration reform.
Any other questions? Right there in the back.
Hi, my name's Tim Pike. I was a history major here at U of R 45 years ago when we had a few other issues to protest. My father-in-law came through Ellis Island in the 30s. Of course, he was 6 years old, but his parents got asked about 4 questions. Do you speak English? Do you have a place to stay? Do you have somebody to sponsor you? Go see our doctor and welcome to America. And I guess my question is, we sure came a long ways from that. But what does an ideal immigration policy look like for us?
Who wants that one? That's a nice
I
big
don't-
broad
exactly.
question.
I'll start. I don't have the ideal. Let me be upfront about that. But I really appreciate you evoking the image of Ellis Island, because that is when we are truest to ourselves as a country, is when we think about our foundation as being a nation of immigrants. And I was reminded recently that the figure of the Statue of Liberty was based on a Muslim model. Of some sorts, right? Like that when we think about where our current debates are, that there are these poetic moments in our in our story as a country that remind us of who we are. So I don't have an ideal answer, but to me, our borders should remain open to the extent that we want people to have access to the American dream. My parents came to the United States because they didn't make it past middle school in then Yugoslavia. They wanted religious freedom and they wanted education for their children. And and that I always say education was the unofficial religion in our home. Everything else was secondary, and that dream should still be available. I also recognize that there are many, as I heard on the radio today, native-born Americans who feel displaced, feel ignored. And I think that we don't have to be in an either-or situation, but a both-and. We're being sold a false narrative around how these people are taking our jobs. And we all know better than that, or we should know better than that at this stage. And we also have to ask ourselves whether we, as Americans, are willing to pay more for the things that we purchase every day in our consumer materialistic society, because that is also part of the trade-off. So the ideal is making space for people and allowing people to find a path to citizenship who have been raised here and know no other place as home.
Xiadani, what about you when it comes to an ideal immigration policy? You're someone that's dealing with the immigration policies that we have.
Yeah, I remember my senior year of high school, I went to a very, for the most part, white, private, Catholic, all-girls high school. So it was, the conversations in like my AP classes would often turn to what immigration reform would look like. And I think standing now and looking back at how naive we were, it's interesting how far we've come. I think someone proposed that the citizenship test should be for all citizens, that if you want to be a citizen of this country, then you should prove it, that regardless of whether you were born here or not, you should indicate that you have this deep-rooted desire to be an active citizen and what that means in your community, that you should understand how this process works in our democracy, and that you should know who your legislators are, and that you should know what all of these positions are. And I think having taken AP US history like the semester before or something, I was like, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I could pass that test. But looking back, I don't think a test like that is a measure of how good of a citizen you are. I think you could be a good citizen by acts of charity, volunteering in your local community, understanding the people who you're around every day. I don't think the measure of citizenship should be knowing what the second president did.
And by the way, that question you asked in radio, always look for this put a bow on it question to end the interview. That was perfect. I was going to do that later, but why not? I want to get an answer from all of you on that. So Niels, you too as well. So, ideal immigration policy, what does that look like?
Well, I mean, this is a political question, a moral question, and states around the world make these decisions. And we see the UK backing out of the EU because it doesn't want European migrants coming to the EU. Our immigration policy has been based upon, in the early days, we were a country of open borders. With the exception of Africans, and I'm not talking about the Native American and the genocide that First Nation peoples have suffered in this country, but we were a country of open borders for a period of time. The 1965 Immigration Act, basically Congress made the determination we want immigrants to be coming here based upon family relationships. Family unification should be a primary focus of that, and that has created problems in Washington because the people who have the close enough relatives to immigrate to the United States, they are predominantly folks from the Western Hemisphere, from Mexico, from Asia, and that is causing consternation in Washington, in Congress. I mean, I remember Pat Buchanan when he was running for president some elections ago, and Pat Buchanan, one of his campaign statements was, we should explicitly favor English-speaking Englishmen over Zulus, because the English are more closely culturally related to us, and that's who we, in quotation marks, want to be. We do not want to be Zulus.
Chief, for you, and maybe you can put it into context in terms of how could an ideal immigration policy make things less tough for the average police officer?
Yeah, I'm probably not qualified to answer the broader question in terms of the technical aspects of the policy because it's just not my area of expertise or that space that I work in. But I will say from a law enforcement standpoint, there are policing challenges associated with immigration issues. From a police officer's standpoint on the field, very, very difficult to do your job when you can't identify somebody. You don't know if the person you're talking to because they don't have identification, because you don't know if this person's wanted for murder in another community because they're not kind of built into the process where we know who people are. That creates some challenges. And then I think the other part that I see is that we are a nation of immigrants, and I don't know that anybody is wanting to fight that, but I think that I do hear a lot of talk about that there should be an accountability to people that have done something wrong and maybe lost that privilege, so to speak. If you get arrested for an armed robbery, should you, and you're an illegal immigrant or something, should you be allowed to stay in the country? And I don't know that there's really a great deal of debate on that. I think most people would say, no, you shouldn't. So it needs to take into account, though, some of those concerns and some of those issues of folks that maybe lose that privilege.
Steve, what about you? What does an ideal immigration policy look like?
I'm going to dodge that question for the most part, but on solid intellectual grounds, I'm a pragmatist, right? So I think that if we're holding out for an ideal immigration policy, we're always going to be dissatisfied. So I would rather think through what are the sort of steps forward in immigration policy making, right? And I think that the holdup in terms of moving forward with the legislative branch actually crafting immigration policy is that it's divisive within that party. And so I think it'll be very difficult to move that forward. What I would want out of immigration policy is something that is reasoned, something that allows for a path towards citizenship for people who are undocumented within the U.S. or long-time residents in the U.S. My goals are frankly minimal because they're framed by a political environment that I don't see the path forward, unfortunately. I wish I did.
I think we have time for a few more questions. Anybody else? Where is the microphone? It's coming.
Hi. So this question is based on the optimistic assumption that Trump is not reelected in 4 years. So assuming that we go back to having a more traditional administration that respects the checks and balances, what are the obstacles that the following administration will face? And what will the sort of legal rebuilding efforts look like considering the level of damage that will be done over the next 4 years? Will we even be able to reverse the majority of these changes at all?
That's projecting far ahead. Steve, you leaning in? That's what you get for leaning.
So that's a great question. But while the premise of 4 years and the alternation makes sense, I'm not sure that 4 years from now we'll have a different style of governance. When populism, and now I'm going to be a political science professor for a second, when populism is introduced into a political system, it's infectious, and it doesn't get eradicated very easily. And so where it rears its head, it tends to sort of stick around for a while. And so it's not clear to me that you can beat a populist 4 years from now with anything other than a populist, which means that some of those political tricks that we associate with populism, sort of questioning separation of powers, impugning other characters, that sort of thing, those scapegoating other populations, those can stick around. And so I'm not sure that we're going to be that fortunate.
Niels, what about you? Did you?
I mean, just on a purely legal, perspective, executive orders can be undone with the stroke of a pen. DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was not even created with an executive order. That was just a memo from the Secretary, at President Obama's instruction that was issued by the Department of Homeland Security. In terms of comprehensive immigration reform, again, that requires Congress, but I think, we have seen, Congress has been paralyzed for some years, and so if that changes, Congress can pass laws very quickly when they see fit. But we just don't have that, that's not something that's going to be happening in the foreseeable future.
Other questions? Right there, right in the front. Right over here.
Hi there, my name is Shauna Golden, and my grandmother immigrated here from Mexico as a translator for the U.S. consulate, and my grandfather immigrated from Ireland through Ellis Island. So I don't know what that makes me exactly when you check boxes, but in any case, I wonder when I heard, I don't watch television, but I listen to NPR a lot, and when I heard this phrase, America First, in the president's inauguration speech, I was really affected by that because I am an American. I'm actually specifically a Californian. But what does that mean? What does that mean as far as our presence in the world? And if we're saying America first, that means everyone else last. And I see that happening in the attempts of policy, and I'm just wondering, what do you guys think of hearing that, America first?
Edina, let's hear from you.
Well, when I hear America First, okay, I'm going to be honest. Here we go. I hear white supremacy. I hope I'm wrong. I want to put that out there very clearly. What I hear is based on what I heard on the campaign trail and based on the signals by Steve Bannon and by the whole contingent within this team that he represents. And that's what I'm truly afraid of. And that's why I talk about this being a struggle of all of us for democracy. Because populism can be infectious, but so too can the moral indignation of America. The reason I hold my American identity and my American citizenship valuable, and I became a citizen when I was like 17, is because sure, we have a lot of ugly history as a country, but we also have a history as a country of movements that bring people back into the center of policy and where we can course correct. So I spend about 30 seconds every day in a pure panic, and the rest of the day, I'm being honest, this is full force now. But the rest of the day, I focus on my children being well-adjusted and positive. I focus on everything that is within my power as an individual to work with my community and anybody else around me who's willing to do my part, because I live with the question of where will I be standing when I tell this story to my grandchildren? Where will I be standing when the history books are written? I can't control what Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, or anybody else does, but I can damn sure control what I do, and my country is too important to me for me to let this vision of America first tell the story of my country.
Xiadani, what about you when you hear the phrase America first?
Honestly, it scares me because I think when that phrase is kind of brought into the ether, I'm not a part of America. There is this racialization of immigration, and I think when someone says America first, even though I've spent my life essentially here, I'm not included in that scope. I'm not an American yet, and so with that, it's troublesome and it's frightening, and I don't think it's apt. I think I do agree. Like it invokes like an image of white supremacy, because I know that regardless of our conversations on immigration, we oftentimes, especially with the rhetoric of Trump, we talk about Mexico. We don't talk about how Chicago has like the greatest concentration of Polish undocumented immigrants outside of Poland. You know, we talk about the Mexicans and the Muslims and about how we're infecting this great country, and I don't think it's accurate.
And
Go ahead, Dorian.
I'm just going to jump in and say, I think the role that California can have in this conversation is taking a look at how immigration itself has been changing in our state in the last 5 years. The highest group of immigrants who've come over have come from Asian countries, right, surpassing those from Mexico and Central America. That brings a whole different set of life experiences, of ties to your homeland, family ties, of economic and educational, cultural backgrounds. That alone is a change that we're seeing in a state where just over a quarter of Californians are foreign-born, right? So I think that looking at the recent changes in immigration speak to how is this conversation going to change, and what's the influence that a state like California will have on the national scene as this goes forward too.
Edina, back to you just for a second. When the phrase was uttered and you said that you think of white supremacy, if an African American comes up to you or Latino comes up to you and say, hey, you know what, I voted for Trump. I believe in America first. I'm not white.
There apparently about 8% of American Muslims also voted for Donald Trump. So it's not any one community. I mean, 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. I mean, people vote against their interests all the time, in my opinion. So I'm sorry, now I forgot your question. You triggered me.
No, for someone that is not white, that says, I believe in America first.
Yes. Okay.
I voted my conscience. I believe in that.
If I understand that there is a segment of America that feels that America first means our jobs, that it means that my life is broken, I don't have a way out or a way up, the American dream isn't available to me either, and that they see that they can look at immigrants and think, they're my competition, they're taking jobs away from me. And I think that that's a true sign that the system is broken, because when we see that the person of color or the immigrant is the competition rather than, than the broader forces in the system that are at work, that's where we've been fooled. And that's where I personally am proud of the portion of America that is standing up and saying we will not be fooled. That this is taking rights away from one group of people to feed another group of people. We won't be allow ourselves to be put into this either or pitted against each other. So I get that people want jobs, and I support infrastructure, all the other projects that are out there. I can get behind some of that, but I can't get behind normalizing this other stuff or looking the other way at all this other stuff for the benefit of me, myself, and I.
Go ahead, Steve.
Just to build on that, I think one of the interesting things about that America First argument is, okay, so is that America first, United States first in global relations? Is that about protecting U.S. national interest? And that's a different set of issues. The problem with the phrase is that embedded within it is an implied definition of Americans. And that's a bounded and oftentimes exclusionary conception of who gets to qualify as an American. And it's about your national origin, or it's about your race, or it's about any number of other criteria. And so the phrase, I think it's probably deliberately ambiguous in the sense that we can take out of it whatever we want. So if I think that the U.S. needs to pull out of NAFTA because U.S. companies are going overseas and that's costing carrier employees their jobs in Indiana, that's America first. The problem is that, and maybe that's problematic as well, but the problematic element, I think, for lots of the political opposition to Trump is that notion of what qualifies and who qualifies as an American is bounded. It's exclusionary, and I think that generates that sort of response that Edina and Xiadani have.
We have time for about 2 more questions. So right there, second row. Where's the microphone? There, it's coming. Microphone's coming. Oh, in the back. Okay, then you in the front right there.
Hi, I'm Destiny Ng. I have kind of a conjoined two questions. I want to know, what would you guys say if you had the opportunity to talk to Donald Trump face to face on your, what would you say to him about what he's trying to do, and how, to me, I feel like he's dividing America. And also, what would you say to all the people that are negatively affected by what's going on and what he's promoting in America today?
So one thing you would say to the president if he was standing in front of you, Xiadani. Just one thing. That's so.
Honestly, I'll take a pass on that one, but I will definitely say to all of the people who are scared and all the people who are worried and concerned because they feel like their home is being ripped from under them, you're not alone. And I think that's been the motivating force behind, I guess, a lot of my transparency. Being an immigrant, and more specifically being undocumented, being low income, being queer, being a woman of color, and whatever that may mean, it's not just me, you know. It's all of us in these different ways and how our identities intersect, and we're not alone, and we'll get through this.
All right, one more question right here, white shirt.
So I'm wondering, as a response to 9/11, and even throughout the Obama administration, local police departments have seen an increased amount of funding in militarizing their departments and increased access to weapons. And so I'm wondering, with these new technologies in local departments' arsenals, if the laws should change, where would your department stand on compliance?
So you mean when you say the laws change?
So if the laws on immigration and travel bans should change, where your department would stand on compliance?
So travel bans is not going to have an impact at a local police department, 60 miles inland from the nearest port. Where our issue and where we may have to make a decision in terms of policy and direction and practice is if suddenly ICE is in the city of San Bernardino saying, we're here with 1,000 agents, we're going on our sweep operations, and San Bernardino PD, we expect you to be right next to us while we're doing it, or you're going to get your federal funding taken away, right? I mean, that's really the draconian image that people have placed on this. I have always maintained, by policy, we can do immigration work right now. It's by practice that it simply doesn't happen, and it's a result of a whole variety of things, as I explained before, community policing, our capacity, what our priorities are, all types of things. None of that necessarily changes because of this new order. I think we are so far removed from that draconian example happening at our local communities. We are so far from that right now that I don't see it happening. And I think that by the time anything even close to that can happen, it is going to be vetted so thoroughly by lawyers and people weighing in as to what our role is that I think it'll be pretty clearly defined. But I will tell you this, and I have no problem making this statement. I made this statement on the radio the other day. My job is not to be political. My job is not to be an activist. My job is to follow the law. And if the law is moral and it's not violating an ethic or anything like that in our job is to follow the law. And so, I'm not going to, be an activist cheap and stuck out there and be the only one in the country saying, nope, I'm not doing it. We're going to follow the law. But I think we are so far removed from something draconian like that that I just don't see it as a real concern. And I know that in some nightmare scenarios, people have that image that that's going to happen. The local police department's going to go in there and we're going to tear families apart and we're going to disrupt things. We are nowhere close to that.
Thank you very much for your questions. And I just want to get one last thought from each of you. The title of the event tonight is New President, New Policy. So 2017 just got started. We're 2 months into it now. If you have a hope, a thought, a projection for the upcoming year when it comes to this title, New President, New Policy, Xiadani, what would be your final thought for the evening?
Let's hope it's better than 2016.
Edina?
Accountability. I think that accountability is the word of the year. I think that we can't lean back, sit back. I think we have to lean in, to borrow a phrase from Sheryl Sandberg, that we have to lean in as citizens right now and hold all of our elected officials accountable. We're really lucky to live here in Southern California. Mayor Garcetti, Governor Brown have been leaders in the country, and I pray that the old phrase, as California goes, so too America goes, will be true.
Niels.
I would hope that on February 19th this year, President Trump marks the 75th anniversary of another executive order, Executive Order 9066, which led to the internment of over 100,000 Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans, and use that as an example of executive orders and the rule of law furthering massive human rights violations.
Chief Burguan.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. So I will get a little maybe outside of the police chief. I would like to see the extreme ends of the rhetoric stop, and let's have common sense dialogue about what this really means and what is the right direction to move in and what is in the greatest interest of this country as a whole. We were talking before this session about this season has been more polarizing than anything that I think any of us can really remember in recent memory, partially fueled, I think, by social media. I mean, when's the last time somebody could go on a social media site and not see just these extreme examples that don't necessarily have a lot of, real basis in reality? Let's have common sense dialogue and respect one another and respect people's opinions.
Steve.
I am concerned about Americans in 2017 getting lazy and having too much confidence in our institutions of government. So one of the things that I think has been really heartening in the past couple of months has been the extent to which people are pushing institutions to operate as institutions are designed to operate. I'm concerned that if that pressure is let up, then institutions won't operate as the constitutional designers wanted them to operate. And so my hope for 2017 is not about policy, it's about politics. It's about continued mobilization and continued pressure on democratic institutions to do their jobs well.
And on the reporting end of things, Dorian, what kind of stories, what kind of things can we expect, or do you expect to see and hear?
Well, I actually wanted to answer the other question.
Okay, go ahead. Sure. We didn't coordinate live radio.
Not about that, but more putting my hat on as a journalist, and I could tell you about some stories we're working on. But I think important in this climate, I would say, I would advocate for transparency, and I think that all the public plays a very important role now, making sure that we know what our elected officials are doing, we understand the policies that are coming, we understand how those policies came together, and we have all the information we need to assess them and decide if we agree with them or we do not agree with them. And when someone says something that is not true, we say that is not true, no matter where they're sitting or who they are. And when we seek information, whether you're a citizen or member of the media or whoever, you know the tools available to you in order to do them and to share them with your community. So I would say transparency.
All right. Xiadani is a DACA recipient, student at the University of Redlands. Edina Lekovic, public affairs consultant, Muslim Public Affairs Council. Niels Frenzen, clinical professor of law and director of the immigration clinic at USC's Gould School of Law. Jarrod Burguan, chief of the San Bernardino Police Department and alumnus here at the University of Redlands. Steve Wuhs, assistant provost for internationalization at the University of Redlands. And Dorian Merina, reporter producer with Take Two. Thanks all of you for being part of this discussion. And thank you for having us out. It was a great time. Thanks.